Hello everybody, get ready because we have the interesting topic of what was inside Noah's Ark. Could all of the animals fit in the Ark? How did Noah store the food for all the animals? How did he remove the waste from the Ark? How did Noah prevent himself and his family from suffocating inside of a boat full of stinky animals? All very important questions that we will be answering in this video.
The first thing we are going to cover is the most commonly asked question. Could all the animals fit on the ark? To answer that question, we must first discuss what animals would actually be on the ark. I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall enter the ark, you and your sons, and your wife, and your sons' wives with you. And of every living thing of all flesh, you shall bring 2 of every kind into the ark, to keep them alive with you. They shall be male and female, of the birds after their kind, and of the animals after their kind, of every creeping thing of the ground after its kind. You shall take with you of every clean animal by 7s, a male and his female, and of the animals that are not clean, 2, a male and his female. Also of the birds of the sky by 7s, male and female, to keep offspring alive on the face of the earth. In other words, Noah had to bring unto the ark 2 of every kind of unclean land animal, and 2 of every unclean flying creature, and 7 pairs of clean land animals, and 7 pairs of clean flying creatures. And I say flying creature instead of bird, because bird in this verse means all flying creatures, including flying insects, birds, bats, and anything else that had powered flight. And for those who don't know, clean animals are animals that God said are edible and are okay to eat. To get a more detailed description of clean and unclean animals, you can read Leviticus chapter 11. Next, we need to find out what is a kind of animal. Some people confuse the ancient biblical classification of kind with the more modern taxonomic classification of species, which couldn't be more wrong. Stop. Hold your horses. What in the world is taxonomy or taxonomic classification? Simply put, taxonomy is the study of grouping animals based on shared characteristics. For example, animals without spines would be classified as invertebrates, and animals with spines would be called vertebrates. Scientists use the taxonomic system to categorize all the different organisms on Earth. In taxonomy, there are 7 main taxa, 7 main groups of animals. The taxa being kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. Kingdom is the broadest classification. For example, the animal kingdom has everything from microorganisms to insects and even dolphins. Species has the most narrow classification. For example, Shamu, Tilikum, and Free Willy are all part of the orca species. With that out of the way, let's get back on track. The modern classification of species did not exist in ancient times. Moreover, species does not accurately represent the biblical classification of kind. Let's read the following scripture. Then God said, "Let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees on the earth bearing fruit after their kind with seed in them." And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed after their kind, and trees bearing fruit with seed in them after their kind. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let the earth bring forth living creatures after their kind, cattle and creeping things, and beasts of the earth after their kind." And it was so. According to the Bible, a kind is a group of organisms that can reproduce with one another and produce offspring, whether that offspring is fertile or not. And I say whether that offspring is fertile or not because sometimes animals, and even humans, produce infertile offspring. Just because 2 people consistently produce infertile children does not mean that the parents are not human or that the child is not a human. It simply means that the 2 parents make children with genetic defects that do not allow them to reproduce. This same concept applies to animals. Just because 2 animals consistently produce infertile offspring does not mean that the 2 animals are not the same kind of animal. It simply means the 2 animals make offspring that cannot reproduce. There are some exceptions to the rule because not all related animals can produce offspring together. But we're not going to get into that for simplicity's sake. But to simplify what I've just said, biblical taxonomy is very simple. If two organisms can produce offspring, they are the same kind of animal. Like donkeys and horses, which make mules, same kind of animal. Or all big cats, lions, tigers, jaguars, they can all mate with each other and reproduce. They are all part of the same biblical classification of kind. Kinds, in reality, are closer to the taxonomic classification of families as opposed to species, but of course there are some exceptions. Now we need to determine how many kinds of land animals and flying animals were on the ark. Some estimates calculate about 6,800 individual animals on the ark, but we're going to be generous with our numbers and do our calculations for 15,000 individual animals as well. Next, we need to determine the average size of an animal. But before we do that, we should also address the age of the animals. Why would the age of the animals be important? Well, we must remember the purpose of the ark is to preserve life. In fact, the Hebrew word for ark, teba, is used only one other time in the Bible. The word was used to describe what Moses was placed in before he was placed in the river. Moses was placed in an ark. He was placed in a life preserver. Not to be confused with the Ark of the Covenant, which is a different word from teba. Going back on track, if life was to continue after the flood, the animals would have to reproduce. So it's unlikely God sent old animals who wouldn't live long, who wouldn't be able to preserve life. Instead, God probably sent young adult and teenager animals on the ark. This also explains how Noah could have fit all the dinosaurs on the ark as well. He wouldn't be sending 100-foot-long sauropods, but instead young ox-sized dinosaurs, young ox-sized sauropods. And if you want to know more about how dinosaurs fit into the Bible and proof of dinosaurs after the flood, please watch my video series on dragons and dinosaurs. Anyways, teenager animals would also live longer and thus have a longer reproductive life, thus helping them populate the earth more effectively. With this in mind, the average size of a young adult animal is smaller than a sheep. So, could 15,000 sheep fit on the ark? As discussed in the last video, the dimensions of the ark are 510 feet long, 85 feet wide, and 51 feet tall. Accounting for the round shape of the ark, its volume was about 1.88 million cubic feet, which means the ark could hold over 350 railroad boxcars. A train with that many cars would be over 3.5 miles long. A boxcar can hold about 120 sheep. So the ark had the capacity to hold about 42,000 sheep-sized animals. If the ark had 15,000 animals in it, they would only take up about 36% of the volume of the ark. And if the ark had a more likely number of 6,800 animals, they would only take up 16% of the ark. So the ark could indeed hold all the animals with plenty of space left over. But how did Noah find all the animals he needed to put in the ark? How would he know what animals to bring in? Well, let's read Genesis chapter 6, verse 20. 2 of every kind will come to you. 2 of every kind will come to you to keep them alive. Simply put, he didn't need to find the animals. The animals came to Noah, and Noah put the animals on the ark. How did the animals not eat each other? Simple solution. He used cages and enclosures. He separated the animals like we do in modern zoos. And if God did bring the animals to the ark, he could have also prevented them from attacking each other like Daniel in the lion's den. Speaking of eating, could Noah have fit enough food in the ark to feed all the animals? Going back to the sheep analogy, sheep eat about 4.5 pounds of hay every day. Therefore, 15,000 sheep would eat about 33.7 tons of food per day. The 15,000 animals would only take about 16% of the ark. If the rest of the ark was filled with 1-ton hay bales, there would be enough food to feed the 15,000 animals for 9 months. If there was only 6,800 animals on the ark, and the rest of the ark was filled with food, the food would last them 26.5 months. That's more than 2 years. But Noah didn't need 2 years of food, or even 9 months of food. Genesis chapter 7 verse 24. The water prevailed upon the earth 150 days. Noah only needed 150 days of food, or about 5 months' worth. If there were 15,000 animals on the ark with 150 days of food, 30% of the ark would be extra space. If we go with the more likely number of 6,800 animals on the ark, 69% of the ark would be extra space. Those calculations don't even take into account that 85% of animals on the ark were smaller than a beagle and thus ate much less than a sheep. It also doesn't account for animals who require less food to survive, like insects and lizards and reptiles. It also doesn't account for hibernators. As an example, if a croc or a snake ate a large enough meal, they could go without food for about a year. So unsurprisingly, not only can you fit all the animals on the ark, but you can also put 5 months of food in it with space still left over. So what did they eat? Since this was a survival situation, they probably were not eating as much as usual, so less than the 4.5 pounds we discussed earlier. Herbivores would obviously eat vegetables and plant matter, but many carnivores will also eat plants, seeds, and fruit when the food supply is low. Despite that, Noah could have fit dried meats and meats preserved in salt for the carnivores. But we also have another problem. Animals are stinky and smelly. The animals may have suffocated if the carbon monoxide they produced did not leave the boat. Not to mention the dangerous amounts of methane the animals could have accumulated. If the methane was not removed from the boat, any kind of spark or fire would blow the ark sky high, and Noah would have needed lighting within the boat due to it being almost completely enclosed. What solution would Noah have to this mostly overlooked problem? Well, since the ark had windows, most of the toxic gases would naturally rise to leave the ark. Placing a moon pool in the ark would help speed up the ventilation process. The cold air from the moon pool would help push the rising, hot, toxic air out of the ark as well. Not only do animals need food, but also water. How did he get enough water for the animals? Simply put, rainwater collection. To avoid overflow, he could have used simple spigots or even cork plugs. There are some more ingenious ways of doing it, but I want to keep it simple. How did he feed the animals? Simply put, he built feeders. They're not that complicated to build. But now we come to the ark's most important problem. A problem that if it had no solution, all the animals would die within the ark, making it a floating coffin. A problem so large that millions of people around the world and throughout time have died because they were not able to solve that problem. The problem being waste management. With 6,800 to 15,000 animals on the ark, how did Noah get rid of all that waste? Waste, if not properly disposed of, can cause disease, sickness. So it was paramount that Noah and his family got rid of the waste. Well, solid waste could have easily been collected with shovels and placed into carts. Once the cart was full of waste, it could be dumped out of the ark or into a waste moon pool. Even if the solid waste was removed, liquid waste and residue from solid waste would still remain. The solution to this would be to simply clean the cages every so often. There are some more ingenious ways of removing waste, but I want to keep it simple. And that begs the question, was Noah smart enough? You should watch the last video where we talked about that. But is there any proof of a worldwide flood? How did the flood happen? Why did God flood the earth in the first place? Well, we'll be talking about that and much more in the next video. God bless and have an amazing day.